This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel suffers some of the worst fires in its history.
These are the most severe fires that have taken place across the country in 4 major areas.
Christian humanitarian groups and American firemen rush in to help. Plus, Muslim militants strike an evangelical church in the heart of Jerusalem.
It was an act, really, I felt, of terror.
Plus, a look at the origins of ISIS, the most brutal Islamic terror group of our time. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. This week we're coming to you from inside the comfort of our Jerusalem studio. Outside, the first major rainstorm of the year is giving Israel some much-needed rain. It's welcome since for nearly a week, major fires spread across Israel recently, scorching hundreds of homes. Israeli officials told CBN News arson contributed to a majority of those blazes, while across Arabic social media, many celebrated the destruction. But help also came from a number of countries and organizations, including CBN's Operation Blessing International. The scope of the fires has been enormous, with more than 75,000 Israelis evacuated from their homes. The fires have destroyed nearly 1,000 dwellings and scorched more than 10,000 acres.
These are the most severe fires that have taken place across the country in 4 major areas.
Israel police spokesman Mickey Rosenfeld said Haifa was hardest hit,
which altogether was a total of 6 fires that almost took place simultaneously in the city of Haifa, and therefore it was suspicious the way the fires began, which led us to believe and led us to carry out operations and find altogether more than 23 suspects that were involved in fires, not just in Haifa but also across Israel as well.
This surveillance footage shows one arsonist caught in the act. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu labeled many of the fires ravaging Israel arson terrorism. Police say 3 of the 4 major fires were deliberately set. Arab social media played a big part.
This is a phase which is unfortunately ignited some of the fires. We've seen suspects that have been active on social media putting out information, calling upon others to carry out and start fires.
But several countries sent firefighting planes and equipment to douse the flames, while other organizations helped the people who suffered on the ground.
Every time there is an emergency, there is some gaps, like small holes that we can fit in and help the families.
Diego Traverso directs Operation Blessing Israel.
In those small gaps, we were able to provide blankets, some shoes. Today, actually, we're heading there again and distributing some food packages for the families.
Traverso says the fires surprised many families.
They were really devastated. They didn't want to talk, and they were just sitting down, going through, some old pictures, burned books, all your memories. It's like you don't have any time to escape. So it was like, in a matter of seconds even, the house got on fire because the winds were so strong.
Traverso says their aim is to help.
We're here to serve the community. No matter if you are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, if you're a human being and you're in need, you're our brother, and we want to help you.
Help not only came from groups like Operation Blessing International, but firemen from the United States answered the call to stand with Israeli firefighters. It took an organization called Emergency Volunteer Project to bring them together. 4 major fires swept throughout Israel. They were dangerous and difficult.
They were bad. I've been on some wildland forest fires back in the States, and they were just as bad as those.
If you stand in front of it, it's going to burn right over you. If you try to run behind it, you can't catch up to it.
With Israeli firefighters stretched to their limit on Thanksgiving Day, the call went out to U.S. firefighters to help.
Amazing how all the American people stood behind Israel when we made the call.
Probably within 6 hours, we had 39 people ready to go.
When they arrived, they deployed throughout the country.
Kind of hit the ground running. As soon as we got here, we started going on calls right away. We were able to help out with some wildland fires, with some structure apartment fires.
They came as part of a program called EVP, Emergency Volunteer Project.
The goal of the project is to find the supporters of Israel that want to have their boots on the ground in Israel during crisis.
Some came during big moments in their lives.
Just before I came, I proposed to my girlfriend, so she is now my fiancée, Kathleen Humphreys, and we've been doing wedding planning over the phone.
For Israeli firefighters, it meant a lot to see so many come.
It always makes a good feeling for us to know that someone overseas care about us and thinking about us, prepared to come and help us.
EVP volunteers also responded during the 2014 war with Hamas. It's a call firefighters answer when their brothers call.
The best way to describe it is a brotherhood. Just like they are your family at home, this is my family at work. And we keep in contact even when we're not in Israel.
Many of the U.S. firemen are Christians and feel a call to stand with Israel.
From the very beginning, I believe that God commands us to stand by them, that we're to be an advocate for Israel, we're to love them. My first trip here, I was given a prophetic word on Isaiah 40, comfort my people. So it means everything to be able to be a part of their lives.
It's a relationship that's expected to keep growing.
This is not going to stop. We love being here. They love having us here.
It's truly an honor for me to come here and be with the guys here in the fire station.
When we called our friends and we asked for their help, they came. And they came big time.
When you meet with these firefighters, you realize firemen from all over the world have a special camaraderie. Here in Jerusalem, a different kind of fire struck an evangelical church. It appears Muslim militants destroyed the facility where the church has met for the last 10 years.
But this is it. It's all of Karen's stuff. Everything. This is what's happening to Living Bread Church, right here.
Michael Hilsden, a former volunteer at Living Bread Church, recorded what happened. Most of the church property and personal belongings of its pastor were burned in this dumpster.
Everything's burnt. Everything. Cool.
It was an act, really, I felt, of terror.
Karen Dunham pastored the Living Bread Church for 10 years. On Saturday, November 24th, Muslim neighbors came into the building and ransacked it.
They've destroyed everything inside. That dumpster right there is full of stones. They tore out the floor, they pulled out the wiring, they punched holes in the walls.
This is what the church used to look like. This is what it looks like now.
You know, I've been there 10 years, or longer. I mean, it's just I've got diaries where you write down what God says to you, Bibles, and they burn all the personal stuff.
The ones who vandalized and seized the church claim the rent has not been paid and that they've been trying to evict the church for 2 years.
We have a legal right to be there right now. Yeah, our rent is paid till next year. Yeah.
And you have a 20-year lease.
And I have a 20-year lease. We have every right to be here.
Do they have every right to do what they did?
None.
The dispute goes back years. In 2014, the Jerusalem Post covered how Dunham's neighbors harassed church members and stole property. Yet this time, Pastor Dunham decided against pursuing legal action.
The biggest power is conquering love. And he said, I want you to go and love those guys. And I want you to tell them you forgive them. And I want you to tell them that your God is in the building waiting for them. And release that building back to me.
The incident troubled a number of local Christians.
Very, very sad. I can't believe that it's happened for us. I can't believe that I am in Israel to take house.
Church members and other local Christians held a prayer service outside the church, expressing hope for the future.
Living Bread International Church, just because they knocked holes in the building and destroyed the building, Living Bread International Church is still alive.
Others expressed hope local authorities will take action. Regardless of the outcome, they believe God will redeem this situation. Up next, how did the Islamic terror group ISIS get started, and how can it be stopped? Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. For 3 years, the Islamic terrorists of ISIS have brought death and destruction to the Middle East. They have committed genocide against Christians and Yazidis, and they've unleashed terror on the world. How did the deadly group get started? And how do we defeat it? Gary Lane brings us this look at the origins of the Islamic State.
Before ISIS was as strong as it is today, it was a network of Islamic extremists known as al-Tawhid al-Jihad, and it was led by this man, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Zarqawi was a Jordanian-born Bedouin of Palestinian heritage. He was an illiterate petty criminal. In 1992, the Jordanian government sent him to jail after guns and explosives were found in his home. There he became radicalized and attempted to enlist fellow prisoners in a plot to overthrow the Jordanian monarchy.
To the best of my knowledge, he wasn't on anybody's radar. That was about 3 years before things really got going with al-Qaeda.
After his release from prison, al-Zarqawi set up a terrorist training camp in Herat, Afghanistan. By the middle of 2002, the CIA suspected him of establishing a similar camp and a poison gas lab in northern Iraq, in a town called Kermal. In March 2003, Zarqawi survived a U.S. airstrike on the camp. Then he moved farther south. After the United States disbanded Saddam's army, Zarqawi enlisted help from some of the former Iraqi officers and operatives. Al-Zarqawi became the symbol of the Sunni resistance, and other extremists followed his example, carrying out many more attacks. In January 2004, the U.S. reportedly intercepted a letter from Zarqawi to the al-Qaeda leadership, saying the best way to defeat the United States in Iraq is to incite a sectarian war among Muslims that will, quote, awaken the sleepy Sunnis. In March 2004, U.S. contractor Nick Berg was beheaded on video. The CIA said Berg's executioner was none other than Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. In June 2006, Zarqawi was tracked down and killed by a U.S. airstrike. Following Zarqawi's death, al-Qaeda Iraq morphed into the Islamic State, and quiet cleric Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi became its leader. They launched a wave of deadly explosives and car bomb attacks in Mosul and Baghdad.
One of the worst things that happened was that after we invaded Iraq, and handled the surge and were in pretty good shape, President Obama effectively pulled out very quickly and left things in chaos.
In April 2013, Baghdadi announced his group would expand into Syria. And so the Islamic State in Iraq became ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. By December 2014, ISIS had fielded more than 30,000 jihadists and occupied territory in 1/3 of Iraq and 1/4 of Syria. Former CIA Director Woolsey is critical of how U.S. intelligence facts about ISIS were altered to fit a political narrative.
Well, this administration starts with a narrative, as they call it, a story, and then they try to fiddle around with the facts to make them fit the narrative rather than changing the narrative to match the real facts. As a result of that, I think it's fair to say that ISIS has grown in importance.
So how can the United States defeat ISIS? Former CIA analyst Fred Flight says the U.S. and Russian air campaign alone will not do it.
We know from history you can't win wars from the air. But even if we wiped out ISIS on the ground, it's the ideology that has to be fought.
Also, the ISIS money supply must be choked off.
It's a terrorist organization that holds territory. It is able to generate money from oil. It's able to generate money from illegal trade. And it probably has supporters from Gulf states who support these radical jihadists, the same people who have been supporting al-Qaeda over the years.
The Sunni Grand Mufti of Syria agrees. When I met Sheikh Hassan in Damascus earlier this year, I asked what would it take to defeat ISIS and end the civil war in Syria.
All religions must come together and see where this financing is coming from for these extremists and stop it. Many Muslim leaders, they have connections and their wealth is related to the fighting. They are financing it.
Recent leaks of Hillary Clinton emails by WikiLeaks show the former Secretary of State knew who was funding the Islamic State. In this August 2014 communication with her campaign chairman John Podesta, Clinton says, "We need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region." And the war against ISIS will not end with the liberation of Mosul.
It has become a powerful organization, a lethal organization, and one that's going to take a fair amount of fighting to destroy in its home court, so to speak, in Syria and Iraq. And then it also has to be defeated in all of our cities and states and neighborhoods in the U.S. and elsewhere. We cannot just ignore it. It's going to get worse.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
If you'd like to know more about ISIS and the situation in the Middle East, you can find out more in this book I wrote called ISIS, Iran, and Israel: What You Need to Know About the Current Mideast Crisis and the Coming Mideast War. It would make a great gift at this time of year, and you can find it on Amazon.com. Coming up, an exclusive interview with Christian missionaries who spent months in an Iranian jail. Welcome back. 3 Christians who spent months in one of the worst prisons in the world are now free. Earlier this summer, Iranian authorities arrested them for allegedly conducting missionary activity. They recently sat down with CBN's George Thomas for their first television interview hours after being released.
Barham Nasibov, Eldar Gurbanov, and Yusuf Faradov knew they faced a risky mission into Iran.
We were expecting God to do something new for us on this trip, but we had no idea of the events that would transpire hours after we arrived.
On June 24, 2016, the 3 men from Azerbaijan, a country along Iran's northwestern border, set out for secret meetings with Iranian Christians. That morning, the men left here, Azerbaijan's capital city of Baku, and headed to the town of Astara, which is on the border between Iran and Azerbaijan. They took about an hour and a half to cross the border, and they were safely inside of Iran. And from there, they caught a taxi headed south about 300 miles to the Iranian capital city of Tehran. Yusuf Faradov was in an apartment leading a Bible study when a sudden knock on the door caught them by surprise.
We opened the door and 20 to 25 men suddenly rushed into the apartment.
Eldar Gurbanov knew they were in trouble.
I knew right away that they were police officers or government agents because I've had similar experiences in Azerbaijan when authorities would raid our Christian meetings.
After questioning, the government charged them with trying to convert Iranians to Christianity and sent the men to Evin prison, Iran's most notorious jail.
The judge told us that we could spend 10 years in prison.
The next 2 months meant days of solitary confinement.
I've been arrested many times for preaching the gospel, but never put in solitary confinement. This was a new experience and I would never wish it upon anyone.
A tiny cold room, no windows, no bed, just a sink. It was Nasibov's 12th visit to Iran.
Of course I had thoughts that I could spend the rest of my life in prison, but I never regretted going to Iran.
That's because in 2003, Nasibov says God posed a question to him from the book of Isaiah.
He asked, "Whom shall I send to the nations?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." Since then, I've tried not to miss an opportunity to go and preach the gospel in other countries.
It was Faradov's first visit.
Right before we left, twice I had a dream that we would be arrested. So naturally, I was apprehensive about the trip. But as I sat in my prison cell, God reminded me of that dream, but also gave me a promise from Psalm 2 that He will make the nations our inheritance. That gave me hope and strength to endure.
They were routinely interrogated and harassed, but never lost hope.
The circumstances in the prison were very difficult. So to stop it from affecting me emotionally and physically, I started praying, even singing aloud, and the guards didn't even stop me.
Nor did they stop Faradov from singing that well-known song, "How Great is Our God." While in jail, the men said they met a secret Iranian Christian convert who came to faith with the help of Saeed Abedini, the American pastor released this past January after spending more than 3 years in Evin prison.
We prayed with him, shared communion together, and we helped him receive the Holy Spirit.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Christian World News. My colleague Wendy Griffith is on assignment. Prison guards in Iran are threatening American pastor Saeed Abedini.
Actually, it was really neat because I used to watch stories about Saeed on Christian World News, and to know that we played a small part in Saeed's story is a real blessing.
Days after their arrest in June, Alexander Neretin, a Russian pastor, started to campaign for the men's release.
We appealed to different humanitarian organizations, human rights organizations, Christian organizations.
Churches across Azerbaijan and in neighboring countries also joined in to try help set the men free.
Actually, for nearly 2 months, we prayed 24 hours a day for our brothers in Iran. Everybody was so eager to pray.
Then, in what Neretin says was nothing short of a miracle, Iranian authorities decided to allow the men to return to Azerbaijan on bail. Neretin flew to Iran carrying $85,000 in bail money. Days later, Nasibov, Gurbanov, and Faradov flew back home free men. CBN News met them hours after their return.
We are so thankful to those who prayed for us and helped to raise the bail money. This could have happened to anyone. We are not special, but people reached out to us, and that means a lot.
Their case is still pending, and while the three will probably never be allowed to travel to Iran again, they said the ordeal has done little to dampen their passion to share Christ's love with others.
This is only the beginning for me. There are people in the world who are waiting for me to come tell them about Jesus. I'm ready, and I'm not afraid. Was it easy? No. Still, I'm thankful to God for the privilege I had to be a part of His work, and in a small way to suffer for the name of Christ.
George Thomas, CBN News, Baku, Azerbaijan.
Up next, a preview of our recent trip to northern Iraq and how you can pray for the Christians of the Middle East. Welcome back. Recently, we traveled to northern Iraq and met with Christians who've suffered terribly at the hands of ISIS. They asked for prayer that God would strengthen their faith as they try to return to their cities and towns ravaged by the Islamic State. We plan to have some of those stories on next week's program so you can know more about the plight of the church in this region. Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.